One crucial decision in the early 1900s quietly changed advertising forever, and it still shapes the way we make purchasing decisions today. While we may all be accustomed to a world filled with psychological advertisements, it can be hard to imagine a time when advertising was much more simple. And prior to the early 1900s, advertising was exactly that. Ads consisted of a product, a price, and a description, nothing more. There was no emotional storytelling and no identity-based messaging. Companies simply made products and then informed consumers about exactly what they were selling. Everything was extremely straightforward and to the point. But then, everything changed. Mass production that occurred as a result of the Industrial Revolution meant that companies were now able to produce far more products than ever before. And this meant that they needed new ways to stand out during this new era. So these companies made a strategic decision that would revolutionize the advertising industry and transform it into what we see today. They realized that not only could they sell their products to consumers based on what they did, but also what they meant and how they could make consumers feel. So they made the decision to shift to a more persuasive and emotional form of advertising. And this shift would reshape our entire culture and the way consumers view products. This is the story of how advertising evolved from information to emotion and persuasion, and how the decision companies made to shift advertising strategies created the world of marketing we know today. While mass production due to the Industrial Revolution may have changed how products were made, it also changed what companies needed from consumers. By the early 1900s, factories were creating products at a scale that the world hadn't previously seen. And while it was obvious that this new level of production could lead to exponentially more revenue than before, production was only one part of the equation, because companies still needed consumers to buy all of these products that were being made. So now companies faced a new problem. Supply outweighed demand. They were now producing more products than people actually wanted. And this was a problem that traditional advertising methods would have difficulty solving, as informing consumers about a product and its features wouldn't be enough to create the demand that was needed to keep up with a new scale of production that companies had now unlocked. Even if a product was described in perfect detail, it still wouldn't necessarily create demand. So companies knew they would have to change their advertising strategy entirely. And the decision to change this strategy would not only change the entire marketing industry, but also the entire culture. So companies started selling not only their products, but the feelings consumers had attached to them. This was the moment advertising shifted away from describing and explaining products to customers to trying to persuade them. And in order to effectively implement this new advertising strategy, companies began hiring psychologists and behavior researchers. These experts were brought in to help companies identify how human behavior and psychological patterns such as fear, insecurities, and desire to fit in could be used to create demand for their products. They introduced the concept that products could represent something bigger than their intended functions. They could represent status, identity, and success. And once companies realized this, they created advertising campaigns that didn't focus on informing consumers about what a product did, but persuading them into buying into the narrative they created around the product. And this created a system that was able to create demand and desire where none existed. This is the system that modern advertising is built upon. And once this new system was built, advertising entered an entirely new era focused on consumer psychology. Advertisers then began studying the consumer mind and behaviors with the same intensity they had previously studied manufacturing. They stopped telling consumers what a product does and focused more on telling consumers who a product will let them become, because they understood that status and emotions were more important to consumers than the actual product features. They learned they could sell soap by telling the story that it would make you clean, admired, and respected. They could sell cars by selling you on the idea of luxury, freedom, and status. And they could sell you cigarettes by forming a narrative that they were synonymous with confidence, rebellion, and sophistication. And whether any of these narratives were true or not didn't matter. All that mattered was that consumers perceived them to be true. And just as this new advertising model was taking shape, a new technology emerged that would amplify it and propel it to unexpected heights. Radio. Radio completely changed the game for advertisers, as they now suddenly had the ability to reach consumers from the comfort of their homes. While advertisers previously had to rely on things like newspapers and billboards to reach customers, they could now speak to them at home and tell them engaging and emotional stories that would create desire for their products. Radio allowed advertisers to not only amplify their message, but also made it feel more intimate. A voice could now tell you who you could be, what you should want, and how a product could get you there. And once advertisers saw how effective this all truly was, they unsurprisingly doubled down. Suddenly, products started to become symbols of status, and identity-based campaigns began appearing everywhere. This was the moment advertising had shifted for good. But while the radio was truly able to take this new marketing strategy to new heights, it was nothing compared to what would happen when an even more advanced technology took center stage: the television. By the mid-1900s, advertisers had already learned how to effectively tap into consumer emotions, but the invention of the television allowed them to take this strategy to new levels, as now they would be able to make those emotions feel real. For the first time, advertisements didn't just have to be heard or read, they could be experienced. Advertisers can now utilize a combination of moving images, actors, music, and in-depth storytelling to sell their products and make consumers feel emotionally invested in them. Consumers began seeing highly produced ads in between television shows, and also subliminal advertisements in the shows themselves, as their favorite characters did things like drinking a Coke in a scene, or had specific brands hidden in the background of their homes. This would prove to be effective marketing, as consumers would become more prone to buying products because the characters they developed parasocial relationships with also use the products. This is when companies realized that people didn't always have to be convinced directly. All they had to do was create a world where buying their product felt natural and like the only logical option. They developed brand loyalty by storytelling, familiarity, and by repeatedly inserting their products into pop culture. And during this era, television didn't just influence culture, it defined it entirely. It directly shaped what society perceived to be proper family roles, success, and personal aspirations. The invention of the television shaped values and perceptions of the world for multiple generations, and successful advertisers were able to take full advantage of this, making many new products household names in the process. So by the time advertising had managed to master capturing emotions, identity, and the integration of technology like the radio and television, it wasn't just selling products anymore. It was shaping our entire society. Ads began defining beauty standards and showing you what a normal life was supposed to look like. And for many people, unrealistic standards that were created by advertisers became everyday expectations. This all worked out perfectly for companies, as many people now felt like they had to purchase certain products in order to fit into societal norms. This all starts for most people even as early as childhood, as we all remember not wanting to wear certain brands because they were considered lame. Companies were now able to successfully manufacture desire through storytelling that a product itself would never be able to do, and they were able to amplify insecurities that only their products would be able to take care of. And when the internet arrived, advertising became even more advanced as ads now became personalized, and people started being targeted with ads that the algorithm knew they would be interested in. This was a complete game changer for companies, as they would no longer have to spend as much money on ads that would only ever reach a small percentage of their target audience. They could just make the ads and target those people directly through the internet. At this point, ads have become so integrated into every part of our everyday lives that they are no longer just influencing purchasing decisions. They're shaping people's entire worldview, and it's crazy to think how different the world would be today if companies decided to stick with the same marketing strategy that they used over a century ago. Looking back on the evolution of advertising, it's easy to see each stage of advertising as a separate progression. From the early days of trying to persuade consumers through newspapers and billboards, to emotional storytelling through radio and television, to the personalized and targeted ads of the internet era. But the truth is, they weren't separate at all. They were all steps in the same direction. A direction that was set in place in the early 1900s when companies made the decision to shift advertising from being purely informational to emotional and persuasive. Every other progression that followed grew from that exact decision. And clearly the shift in strategies has been successful, as compelling and emotional ads are now so ingrained in our society that it would be strange to imagine a world without them. And whether we realize it or not, these ads are shaping everything about our current society, from the products we buy, to the trends we follow, to even the values people have. And that's the power of modern advertising. Not only is it able to sell products, but it's able to create an entire world where only those products make sense and where they feel like the only real option. They are finally able to truly do what companies set out to do over 100 years ago, which is create desire for products where there is none. So it looks like the decision to shift advertising strategies truly did pay off, as it still defines how business works today and will likely continue to do so for the foreseeable future. This was the Visionary Analyst. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe, drop a like on the video, and follow me on any of my social media accounts linked in the description below. And don't miss the next video, where we'll be covering the collapse of the former toy store empire, Toys R Us.